Welcome back to the Roots of Fear, where we uncover the darkest corners of history. Today we journey to the rolling hills of Kentucky, the year 1898, where an orphanage stood isolated from the world, a place where no child was ever born, and mysteriously no one ever died. This is the story of Winthrop, home for children. The bluegrass region of Kentucky was known for its gentle beauty, rolling pastures, thoroughbred horses, and the sweet scent of tobacco fields. But nestled in the shadows of Crow Hill, some 20 miles from Louisville, stood a structure that seemed to reject the natural order of things. The Winthrop Home for Children was established in 1865, just as the Civil War drew to its bloody close. Constructed of red brick and dark timber, it was funded by Augustus Winthrop, a northern industrialist who claimed philanthropic intentions. The orphanage was built to house the children left parentless by the war, both Union and Confederate. A noble cause, most agreed. But from the moment the foundation stones were laid, strange accounts began to circulate among the laborious. Thomas Briarwood was a journalist for the Louisville Courier in 1898, a man of rational mind and scientific curiosity. He had spent the better part of his career debunking the superstitious tales that plagued the Kentucky ghost stories, he believed, were merely the product of unsophisticated minds and poor lighting. But on October 17, 1898, a letter arrived at his desk that would challenge everything he thought he knew. Dear Mr. Briarwood, I write to you with a matter of grave concern regarding the Winthrop Home for Children. I have served as the physician for this institution for 7 years, and in that time I have witnessed phenomena that defy rational explanation. No child has been born within these walls, despite several expectant mothers taking refuge here. More disturbing still, no resident, child or adult, has ever perished on these grounds, even those suffering terminal afflictions. I invite you to investigate this matter, as I fear my own observations will soon be dismissed as the ravings of a man who has lost his faculties. Respectfully, Dr. James Harwood. Thomas might have dismissed the letter as nonsense had it not been for Dr. Harwood's reputation. The physician was known throughout the region as a man of impeccable character and scientific discipline. If he believed something unnatural was occurring at Winthrop, it warranted investigation. And so, on a crisp autumn morning, Thomas Briarwood loaded his Kodak box camera and notebook into his carriage and set out for Crow Hill. The journey took the better part of the day, with the road growing narrower and less maintained the further he traveled from Louisville. As the sun began its descent behind the western hills, the orphanage came into view. The Winthrop home was larger than Thomas had anticipated, 3 stories of imposing architecture with narrow windows that seemed to watch his approach. The grounds were immaculately maintained, with neatly trimmed hedges and a circular driveway leading to the main entrance. Yet, despite this apparent care, not a single child played on the sprawling lawn. As Thomas brought his carriage to a halt, the front door opened. A woman emerged, her black dress starched and severe, her grey hair pulled back in a tight bun. This was matron Eleanor Finch, the administrator of Winthrop Home, known for her strict adherence to routine and discipline. Mr. Briarwood, I presume, she said, her voice as crisp as her appearance. Dr. Harwood informed me of your visit. I must say, I find his concerns to be greatly exaggerated, but you are welcome to see for yourself that we run a perfectly ordinary institution here. Thomas noted that her words of welcome did not match the coolness of her tone or the suspicion in her eyes. Thank you, Matron Finch. I appreciate your hospitality, he replied, gathering his equipment. I assure you, I'm merely here to observe and report the facts. Whatever they may be. Facts, she echoed with the faintest hint of a smile. Yes. Let us stick to those. The interior of Winthrop home was clean, but austere. Oil lamps cast long shadows across hardwood. Floors polished to a mirror shine. The walls were adorned with biblical scenes and stern portraits of past benefactors. As Matron Finch led Thomas through the main hall, he noticed the unusual quiet. The children are at evening study, she explained, seemingly reading his thoughts. We maintain a strict schedule here, Mr. Briarwood. Structure is essential for young minds. Thomas nodded, making a note in his journal. How many children currently reside at Winthrop? 47, she answered promptly. Ages 5 to 16. Once they reach 17, we secure apprenticeships or domestic positions for them in Louisville or Lexington. And how many staff? Myself. Dr. Harwood, who visits twice weekly, 3 teachers, a cook, 2 groundskeepers, and 4 caretakers who supervise the children. We are quite adequately staffed. As they passed a closed door, Thomas heard the faint sound of children reciting multiplication tables in unison. The voices seemed oddly distant, as though coming from underwater. May I see the children? Thomas asked. Matron Finch checked her pocket watch. They will be at supper in 30 minutes. You may observe them then. In the meantime, Dr. Harwood is waiting for you in the infirmary. She led him up a sweeping staircase to the 2nd floor, where the infirmary occupied the east wing. The smell of carbolic acid and camphor grew stronger as they approached. Dr. Harwood stood by a window, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading daylight. At 55, his once dark hair had turned silver, but his posture remained military straight, a remnant of his service as a Union Army surgeon. Thomas Briarwood, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. I trust your journey was uneventful. Entirely so, Thomas replied, shaking the doctor's hand and noting the strength still present in the older man's grip. Matron Finch cleared her throat. I'll leave you, gentlemen, to your discussion. Supper is at 6 sharp. Mr. Briarwood, should you wish to observe the children, dear Harwood knows where to find me, should you need anything else. As she departed, closing the door firmly behind her. Dear Harwood's professional demeanor seemed to crack slightly. She thinks I'm losing my mind, he said quietly. Perhaps I am. But the facts remain, and they are most troubling. Tell me everything, Thomas said, taking out his notebook. From the beginning, Dr. Harwood would move to his desk, unlocking a drawer with a small key he kept on his watch chain. From it, he withdrew a leather-bound journal. I began documenting the anomalies in 1893. My 2nd year of service here, he explained. At first, they seemed mere coincidences. A child with diphtheria who recovered when death seemed certain. An elderly caretaker whose heart condition suddenly and inexplicably improved. But as the years passed, a pattern emerged. He opened the journal, revealing pages of meticulous notes, diagrams, and observations. In 7 years, Mr. Briarwood, not a single person has died within these walls. We've had individuals with consumption, scarlet fever, pneumonia, ailments that elsewhere claimed lives with regularity. Yet here they linger in a state of neither recovery nor decline. Thomas frowned, skepticism evident in his expression. Perhaps your medical care is simply exceptional, Dr. Harwood shook his head. I wish that were the explanation. Consider the case of young William Thornton, age 9. 3 years ago, he arrived with advanced tuberculosis. By all medical understanding, he should have succumbed within months. Yet, he remains in precisely the same condition, neither improving nor worsening. His symptoms diminish while he resides here, only to return with greater severity if he leaves the grounds, even briefly. You've tested this repeatedly. When William accompanies me to Louisville for specialized treatments, his condition deteriorates within hours. Upon return to Winthrop, he stabilizes once more. Thomas made notes. His journalistic instinct, sensing a remarkable story, even if the explanation might prove mundane. And what of the claim that no births have occurred here? Dr. Harwood's expression darkened. That is perhaps even more disturbing. Since Winthrop's establishment, 7 young women, either staff or older residents, have found themselves with child while living here. In each case, as their time approached, complications necessitated their removal to hospitals in Louisville. Not one delivery has ever been completed on these grounds. Coincidence, perhaps? I considered that until last year when caretaker Sarah Miller went into labor unexpectedly during a severe storm that made roads impassable. For 18 hours, her labor pains continued at regular intervals, growing neither stronger nor weaker. The moment the roads cleared and we could transport her to Louisville, her child was born within minutes of arriving at the hospital. Thomas tapped his pencil against his notebook. These accounts are certainly unusual, Doctor, but might there be environmental factors at work? Perhaps something in the water supply or the soil. I've considered every rational explanation, Mr. Briarwood. I've tested the water, examined the soil, inspected the structure for toxic substances. Nothing. Furthermore, these phenomena extend beyond mere physical ailments. That would be the supper bell, Dr. Harwood said, closing his journal. We should proceed to the dining hall. The children will be gathering now. The dining hall occupied much of the ground floor's west wing. A long room with high ceilings and tall windows now darkened by nightfall. 2 rows of tables stretched the length of the room with benches on either side. Oil lamps hung from iron chains, casting pools of yellow light that failed to fully dispel the shadows in the corners. Thomas and Dr. Harwood entered through a side door, positioning themselves near the serving area where they could observe without disrupting the routine. Children filed in with military precision, organized by age and height. They stood behind their designated places, hands clasped before them, until Matron Finch entered and gave a nod of approval. What struck Thomas immediately was their silence. 47 children, ranging from small, hollow-cheeked 5-year-olds to gangly teenagers on the cusp of adulthood, and barely a whisper among them. More unsettling still was their pallor. Each child possessed the same waxy complexion, regardless of their natural coloring. Notice anything unusual? Dr. Harwood whispered. Thomas scanned the room, trying to identify what felt so wrong beyond the unnatural quiet. Then it struck him. None of the children were looking at each other. Their gazes remained fixed forward or down at their plates, never meeting, never acknowledging their neighbors. They don't interact, he murmured. Not during meals, not during lessons, not during their allocated recreation time, the doctor confirmed. Matron Finch calls it discipline. I call it something else entirely. A prayer was recited in unison, the children's voices creating that same underwater quality Thomas had noted earlier. Then they sat, and female caretakers in grey uniforms served bowls of what appeared to be a thin stew with bread. "May I speak with them?" Thomas asked. After the meal, Matron Finch is strict about maintaining silence during supper. As they watched, Thomas noticed a small boy, perhaps 7 years old, at the far end of the table nearest them. Unlike the others whose movements were mechanical and identical, this child's hands trembled as he attempted to bring his spoon to his mouth. Some of the stew spilled onto the table. Immediately, a caretaker appeared behind him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. No words were exchanged, but the boy's trembling intensified. As Thomas watched, a curious thing happened. The spilled liquid began to creep back into the boy's bowl, defying gravity and natural law. Thomas blinked hard, certain he had imagined it. When he looked again, the table was clean, and the boy was eating without spillage, though his face had grown even paler. "Did you see?" Thomas began. "Not here," Dr. Harwood interrupted quietly. "We'll discuss it later." After the meal concluded, the children filed out with the same eerie precision with which they had entered. Matron Finch approached Thomas and the doctor, her thin lips pressed into what might generously be called a smile. "You may speak with 3 children of your choosing, Mr. Briarwood," she said. "In the library under supervision. I trust that will be sufficient for your investigation." Thomas nodded, though he had hoped for more unrestricted access. The small boy at the end table, the one who spilled his soup. "May I speak with him first?" Something flickered across the matron's face. Surprised perhaps, or concerned. "Nathaniel." "Very well. I'll have him sent to the library. You may have 10 minutes with each child." The library was a circular room in what Thomas guessed had once been a turret. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls filled with leather-bound volumes that appeared untouched. A small table with 4 chairs occupied the center of the room, illuminated by a hanging oil lamp. Nathaniel entered a few minutes later, escorted by a stern-faced caretaker, who positioned herself by the door after instructing the boy to sit across from Thomas. Up close, the child's pallor was even more pronounced. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his blonde hair lay flat against his skull. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, gaze fixed on the table's polished surface. "Hello, Nathaniel," Thomas said gently. "My name is Thomas Briarwood. I'm a journalist from Louisville." The boy gave no indication he had heard. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about Winthrop home, if that's all right." Still no response. The caretaker by the door shifted her weight, the floorboards creaking beneath her. Thomas tried again. "How long have you been at Winthrop, Nathaniel?" For a moment, he thought the boy would remain silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he replied, 2 years, sir." "And how do you find it here?" "It is a good place, sir. We are fortunate to have such care." The words sounded rehearsed, as though recited from memory rather than felt. Thomas changed tactics. "I noticed you had some trouble at supper. Are you feeling unwell?" For the first time, Nathaniel's eyes flicked upward, meeting Thomas's for the briefest moment before darting away. In that instant, Thomas saw something that sent a chill through him. Not fear, as he had expected, but emptiness. The boy's eyes seemed hollow, lacking the spark that animated every human being Thomas had ever encountered. "I am never unwell here, sir," Nathaniel said. "None of us are. You never get Sick, never have accidents or injuries. Not inside the walls, sir. Thomas leaned forward slightly. What happens if you leave the walls? Nathaniel. The caretaker by the door cleared her throat loudly. Mr. Briarwood, please confine your questions to the child's experiences within our care. Ignoring. Thomas pressed on. Have you ever left Winthrop since arriving, Nathaniel? The boy's hands began to tremble again. Just as they had at supper. Once he whispered so softly Thomas had to strain to hear for a possible adoption. I became very ill. They brought me back. And after you returned I was better immediately. A pause, then even more quietly, but I remembered what it felt like outside. What did it feel like? Nathaniel's trembling increased. Real? He breathed. The caretaker stepped forward. That's quite enough, Mr. Briarwood. Nathaniel needs his rest. As she moved to usher the boy out, Thomas noticed something odd. Her shadow on the wall did not match her movements. It seemed to lag slightly, as though reluctant to follow its owner. The next child was a girl of about 14 named Emily Sullivan. Unlike Nathaniel, she displayed no visible distress, answering Thomas's questions with calm detachment. Yes, she had been at Winthrop for 6 years. Yes, she was treated well. No, she never fell ill. No, she did not miss the outside world. Her responses were perfect, practiced, and utterly devoid of emotion. The third child, 16-year-old Robert James, was similarly detached. He spoke of soon leaving Winthrop for an apprenticeship with a blacksmith in Lexington, his voice betraying neither anticipation nor regret. When Thomas asked if he was looking forward to it, the boy simply stared at him as though the question made no sense. After the interviews concluded, Matron Finch informed Thomas that a room had been prepared for him as the hour was too late for a return journey to Louisville. You'll stay in the guest quarters in the East Wing, she said. Dr. Harwood will be returning to town tonight, but we'll be back on Thursday for his regular visit. Thomas glanced at the doctor in surprise. Their earlier conversation had given him the impression that Harwood intended to remain while Thomas conducted his investigation. A family emergency, Dr. Harwood explained, not meeting Thomas's eyes. Most unfortunate timing, but I shall return in 2 days, and we can continue our discussion then. There was something forced in his tone. A tension that hadn't been present earlier. Thomas nodded, sensing that further questions would be unwelcome in Matron Finch's presence. I appreciate your hospitality, he told her, and the opportunity to observe your establishment. Of course, she replied with that same cold smile. We have nothing to hide at Winthrop home. The guest room was small but well appointed with a narrow bed, wash stand, writing desk, and chair. A single window overlooked the back gardens, now shrouded in darkness. Thomas set his camera and notebook on the desk before testing the mattress, firm, but not uncomfortable. As he prepared for bed, a soft knock sounded at his door. Opening it, he found a young caretaker he hadn't seen before holding a folded piece of paper. From Dr. Harwood, sir, she whispered, glancing nervously down the hall before pressing the note into his hand and hurrying away. Thomas closed the door and unfolded the paper. The doctor's handwriting was hurried, the ink still fresh. Briarwood, I did not choose to leave. Was informed my presence is no longer required for your investigation. Exercise extreme caution. Do not sleep in the room they've given you. The basement archives contain records you should examine. Enter. through the kitchen storeroom after midnight. What happens here defies natural law, but there is evidence. Trust nothing and no one, especially what your eyes tell you after dark. Harwood. Thomas read the note twice. Then held it to the lamp flame, watching it curl and blacken before dropping the ash into the wash basin. If Harwood had been forced to leave, it suggested Matron Finch had something to hide, something she feared the doctor might reveal. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed 10. Thomas had at least 2 hours before he could safely attempt to reach the basement archives. He decided to use the time to review his notes and prepare his camera should he discover anything worth documenting. As he sat at the desk, the oil lamp beside him flickered, though there was no draft. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, taking on shapes that didn't correspond to the furniture. Casting them, Thomas rubbed his eyes, attributing the phenomenon to fatigue from his journey. A sound from the hallway caught his attention, soft footsteps passing his door, accompanied by what sounded like whispering. Moving quietly, Thomas pressed his ear against the wood more than the others. A voice murmured. One of the caretakers, he thought. Matron says we must be vigilant. Will she use the room tonight? Another voice asked, only if necessary. The journalist mustn't suspect. The footsteps continued past, fading into silence. Thomas remained at the door, heart pounding. What room were they referring to? And what must he not suspect? Deciding against waiting until midnight, Thomas took his notebook and camera, then cautiously opened his door. The hallway was empty, lit only by a single wall sconce at the far end. He stepped out, closing the door silently behind him. The east wing contained primarily staff quarters and storage rooms. According to what Dr. Harwood had told him earlier, the children's dormitories occupied the entire third floor, while classrooms and common areas filled the second. If he could reach the main staircase without being detected, he might be able to make his way to the kitchen and find the entrance to the basement archives. Thomas moved carefully, avoiding the center of the hallway where the board seemed most likely to creak. As he passed a door left slightly ajar, he glimpsed a caretaker seated at a small table, her back to him, writing in a ledger. He held his breath and continued past. The main hall was deserted when he reached it, the grand staircase rising from the center like the spine of some great beast. Oil lamps burned low, creating more shadows than light. From somewhere above came the sound of a child crying, soft, muffled sobs that seemed to resonate through the very walls of the building. Thomas hesitated, torn between investigating the source of the crying and continuing to the basement as Harwood had instructed. The decision was made for him when he heard footsteps on the upper landing. Quick and purposeful, heading toward the sound of distress. Ducking behind a large potted fern, Thomas watched as Matron Finch descended the stairs, her face a mask of irritation. She was followed by 2 caretakers carrying what appeared to be medical equipment. A stretcher, straps, and a black bag similar to Dr. Harwood's. Take her to the room, Matron Finch instructed, her voice cold, the usual procedure. I want her back in the dormitory before dawn with no one the wiser. Yes, matron, the caretakers replied in unison. The trio ascended once more, their footsteps fading as they reached the third floor. Thomas remained hidden for several minutes, ensuring they wouldn't return unexpectedly, then continued toward the rear of the building where the kitchen was located. The kitchen was dark and silent. The hearth fire banked for the night. Moonlight streamed through windows high in the wall, casting silver rectangles on the stone floor. Thomas navigated around the central work, past the massive cast-iron stove, toward a door he presumed led to the storeroom. It opened with a faint creak, revealing shelves stocked with preserved foods, dry goods, and kitchen supplies. At first glance, there appeared to be no access to any lower level. Thomas moved deeper into the storeroom, running his hands along the walls, searching for any indication of a hidden entrance. In the far corner, behind a stack of flour sacks, his fingers detected a change in the texture of the wall. A thin seam running vertically from floor to ceiling. Pushing aside the sacks, he discovered a narrow door painted to match the surrounding wall and fitted with a small iron handle. Beyond lay a steep staircase descending into darkness. Thomas hesitated, wishing he'd thought to bring the oil lamp from his room. After a moment's consideration, he returned to the kitchen and located a box of phosphorus matches and a small candle, which he lit before venturing down the stairs. The basement was larger than he'd expected, extending beneath the entire central portion of the orphanage. Stone walls glistened with moisture, and the air held the musty scent of old paper and something else. Something metallic and vaguely unpleasant. The archives were organized in tall wooden cabinets along the walls, each labeled with a year. Thomas began with 1865, the year of Winthrop's founding, working forward methodically. The records were meticulous. Admissions, departures, medical histories, educational assessments. Nothing immediately struck him as unusual until he reached 1870. Beginning that year, a new category appeared in the ledgers. Treatments. These entries were written in a different hand using a curious shorthand that Thomas couldn't decipher. They corresponded to names in the medical records, primarily children who had arrived with serious illnesses. Thomas photographed several pages, ensuring the flash powder illuminated the text clearly. As he worked his way through subsequent years, a pattern emerged. Every child or staff member who should have died, according to medical science, was instead listed as having received these mysterious treatments. None were recorded as deceased. In 1878, a new record book appeared titled simply, The Arrangement. This volume was locked, secured with a small brass padlock. Thomas examined it carefully, noting that it appeared to have been frequently handled, the leather binding worn at the edges. As he was considering how he might open it without causing obvious damage, a sound from the staircase froze him in place. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, descending into the basement. Thomas quickly extinguished his candle and moved behind a tall cabinet, his camera and notebook clutched to his chest. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, accompanied now by the glow of an approaching lamp. Mr. Briarwood called Matron Finch's voice eerily calm. "I know. You're down here. There's no need for concealment. I simply wish to talk." Thomas remained motionless, scarcely daring to breathe. The light grew brighter as she moved among the cabinets, her shadow elongating across the stone floor. "You're curious about our methods," she continued. "That's perfectly natural. Mr. Harwood was curious too when he first came to us. But he learned to appreciate the necessity of our work, as I hope you will." She was closer now, just one cabinet away from his hiding place. Winthrop Home serves a greater purpose than mere charity. Mr. Briarwood, these children, unwanted, forgotten by society. They have a value beyond what the outside world could ever recognize. The light swung around the edge of the cabinet. Thomas pressed himself flatter against the wall. "They sustain us," Matron Finch said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Their vitality, their potential, their very essence. It feeds the house. And in return, the house preserves them, protects them, keeps them in perfect suspension, neither growing nor fading. A most equitable arrangement. Wouldn't you agree?" The light withdrew slightly, as though she had turned away. Augustus Winthrop understood this. He sought places of power throughout the country, places where the veil between worlds grew thin. This hill had been sacred to the native tribes long before white settlers arrived. They recognized its potential. As did he. Thomas's mind raced, trying to make sense of her words, the strangeness he had witnessed, the children's pause, their detachment, the unnatural silence. It suggested something far beyond ordinary. Mistreatment or neglect. "The arrangement requires maintenance, of course," Matron Finch continued, moving away toward the center of the basement. "Periodic renewal of the binding conditions. Dr. Harwood proved quite useful in this regard. Though he doesn't fully comprehend the process. His medical knowledge helped refine our techniques considerably." The light bulbed as she moved toward the staircase once more. "I'll leave you to your investigation, Mr. Briarwood. The night is long, and there's much for you to discover, but know this. No one who learns of the arrangement ever leaves Winthrop home. Not truly. You may think yourself separate from us now, but already the house has tasted your presence. Already it has begun to draw you in." Thomas remained hidden for several minutes after the sound of the door closing echoed through the basement. When he was certain Matron Finch had truly departed, he writes. Her words had been more than threatening. They had been spoken with the absolute certainty of someone who knew she couldn't be stopped. This suggested either madness or a confidence born of previous success. Returning to the locked volume labeled The Arrangement, Thomas examined it more closely. The lock was small and simple, the sort that could be opened with a hairpin or similar tool. Searching his pockets, he found the thin metal nib he sometimes used for detailed sketches. With careful manipulation, he managed to spring the mechanism. The pages within were filled with diagrams and text in multiple languages, Latin, Greek, and something older that Thomas couldn't identify. Drawings depicted the orphanage's foundation stones laid in a complex pattern that formed what appeared to be a massive sigil when viewed from above. Other illustrations showed children arranged in specific formations throughout the building with lines of energy flowing from them into the structure itself. Marginal notes described harvesting cycles and renewal ceremonies conducted on the solstices and equinoxes. Most disturbing were the detailed accounts of what happened when children attempted to leave permanently, how the house would reclaim its investment through sudden catastrophic illness or accident unless certain protocols were followed. The final pages contained a list of names, benefactors of Winthrop Home who had received what was called the extension. Beside each name was a date of birth and what should have been a date of death, except instead of the latter, there was a series of dates spanning years or even decades, each marked with the notation renewal. Augustus Winthrop's name headed the list, with a birth date of 1801, and renewals continuing to the present year. 1898, he would be 97 years old if these records were to be believed. Thomas photographed as many pages as he could, his heart pounding with each flash of powder. The implications were horrifying. Winthrop Home wasn't an orphanage at all, but a farm of sorts, harvesting the life energy of children. to extend the lives of wealthy benefactors. As he prepared to close the book, a loose page slipped from between the covers. A letter dated just 3 weeks earlier. Matron Finch, quarterly. Inspection scheduled for November 1st, preparations should begin immediately. The board is particularly interested in Subject 37, Nathaniel, whose unusual resistance makes him ideal for the upcoming renewal ceremony. Ensure he is properly conditioned. My own extension is scheduled for December 21st. After 33 years, I find the intervals between renewals growing shorter. Dr. Harwood has expressed concerns about the sustainability of our methods. Please remind him of his obligations and the consequences of non-compliance. Or, Thomas tucked the letter into his notebook and replaced the volume, securing the lock as best he could. He needed to document everything, then find a way to escape with his evidence. More importantly, he needed to understand what was happening to the children, especially Nathaniel, and whether they could be freed from whatever horrific process bound them to this place. The grandfather clock in the hall above chimed midnight as Thomas ascended the stairs back to the kitchen storeroom. The orphanage had fallen completely silent, not even the normal creaks and settling sounds of a large building disturbing the stillness. This unnatural quiet made his progress through the kitchen and back hall even more precarious, each footstep seeming to echo with unwarranted loudness. He had nearly reached the main staircase when a flicker of movement caught his eye, a figure crossing the entrance hall, moving toward the front door. It was Nathaniel, dressed in his nightclothes, walking with the stiff gait of a sleepwalker. Without conscious thought, Thomas followed, keeping to the shadows. The boy reached the massive front door and placed his palm against the wood. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the door began to swing open, though Nathaniel hadn't touched the handle. Cold night air rushed into the hall, carrying with it the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Nathaniel stepped onto the front porch, his bare feet making no sound on the wooden boards. Thomas followed, hanging back at the threshold. The full moon illuminated the scene with silver light, the circular driveway, the manicured hedges, the raw iron gate at the property's edge. Nathaniel descended the porch steps and began walking toward that gate, his pace steady but unhurried. Thomas watched, wondering if he was witnessing an escape attempt or something else entirely. As the boy reached the midpoint of the driveway, a change came over him. His steps faltered, and he clutched at his chest, doubling over as though in sudden pain. Still, he continued forward, each step visibly more difficult than the last. By the time he reached the gate, he was crawling, his nightclothes soaked with sweat despite the autumn chill. Then, as his fingers touched the iron bars, Nathaniel began to scream. A high, thin sound of pure agony that shattered the night silence. Thomas rushed forward without thinking, reaching the boy just as lights began to appear in the orphanage windows. Nathaniel's skin burned with fever, his eyes rolled back to show only whites. Help me, Thomas urged, trying to lift the child. I'll get you away from here. But as he attempted to raise Nathaniel from the ground, he felt resistance. Not from the boy's weight, but from something else. It was as though invisible tethers connected Nathaniel to the earth beneath them, anchoring him to the property. Footsteps and voices approached from the house. Thomas looked up to see Matron Finch and several caretakers hurrying down the driveway, faces grim in the moonlight. Step away from the child, Mr. Briarwood, Matron Finch commanded. You don't understand what you're interfering with. I understand enough, Thomas replied, continuing his struggle to lift Nathaniel. This boy needs medical attention. Real medical care, not whatever abomination you're practicing here. Matron Finch's expression hardened. Nathaniel belongs to Winthrop home, as do all who enter here. She turned to the caretakers. Bring them both to the room. It seems our journalist friend requires a more practical demonstration of the arrangement. Before Thomas could respond, something struck him from behind. A sharp pain at the base of his skull, followed by encroaching darkness. The last thing he saw was Nathaniel being lifted by the caretakers. The boy's body limp as a rag doll, his eyes now open and staring directly at Thomas with a silent plea. Consciousness returned gradually, accompanied by a throbbing pain in his head and the sensation of cold stone beneath his back. Thomas opened his eyes to near darkness, broken only by the glow of candles arranged in a circle around him. He tried to move only to discover he was bound securely to some kind of stone table or altar. Turning his head slightly, he could make out walls of rough honeyed stone. Not the finished basement he had explored earlier, but something older, more primitive, perhaps a sub or foundation chamber. He wakes, came a voice from beyond the circle of candlelight. Matron Finch. Good. The process requires consciousness. Thomas strained against his restraints. What have you done with Nathaniel? The boy is being prepared. His connection to Winthrop home makes him particularly valuable. A rare case of complete integration with the property's essence. Most children retain some sense of separation, some memory of an external identity. Not Nathaniel. He surrendered himself entirely, becoming a perfect conduit. You're insane, Thomas spat. These are children, not resources to be harvested. A figure stepped into the circle of light. Not Matron Finch as he had expected, but an elderly man, his face deeply lined, but his eyes bright with an unnatural vitality. Despite his advanced years, he stood straight and moved with the ease of someone far younger. Resources, he echoed, his voice surprisingly strong. An apt description, Mr. Briarwood. Everything in this world is a resource to those who understand how to harness it properly. Augustus Winthrop, Thomas said, recognizing the face from portraits he had seen throughout the orphanage. The old man inclined his head slightly, unflattered by your recognition. Few outside our circle know my face, as I find it prudent to limit my public appearances. Longevity such as mine raises questions. 97 years old, Thomas said, according to your records. Something like surprise flickered across Winthrop's features. You've been thorough in your investigation, more thorough than we anticipated. Dr. Harwood should have been more careful with his correspondence. Harwood tried to warn me. Where is he now? Attending to his duties elsewhere. The doctor's medical expertise remains valuable to our operation despite his occasional moral qualms. Winthrop moved closer, studying Thomas with clinical detachment. You, however, present a more complex problem. Journalists are noticed when they disappear. Questions are asked. Investigations follow. Then let me go, Thomas suggested, forcing his voice to remain steady. I'll forget what I've seen here. Winthrop's laugh was dry and brittle. We both know that's not true. No, Mr. Briarwood, you won't be leaving Winthrop home. At least not as you are now, but you may serve a greater purpose than you ever imagined possible. He gestured to someone beyond the circle of light. Footsteps approached, and a caretaker appeared, leading Nathaniel by the hand. The boy's earlier distress had vanished, replaced by that same empty-eyed compliance Thomas had observed during their interview. Nathaniel has been with us since he was 7, Winthrop explained. Abandoned, unwanted, forgotten. Like all our children, society had no use for him. But we recognized his potential. The intensity of his life force is quite remarkable. What are you going to do to him? Thomas demanded renewed struggles against his restraints. Not to him, Mr. Briarwood. Through him, Nathaniel serves as a conduit between the children of Winthrop home and those of us who benefit from the arrangement. Tonight he will facilitate your integration into our fellowship. Winthrop nodded to Matron Finch, who stepped forward, carrying a silver chalice. She held it to Nathaniel's wrist, where Thomas now noticed a thin red line, a fresh incision. The essence must be freely given. Winthrop continued, watching as dark liquid dripped into the chalice. A principle we discovered early in our work. Coercion diminishes the efficacy. The children must surrender their vitality willingly, believing it serves a greater good. And how do you secure this willing surrender? Thomas asked bitterly. Through lies and manipulation. Through purpose, Winthrop corrected, these children had none before coming here. We give them meaning, importance. They become part of something eternal. When the chalice was half filled, Matron Finch withdrew it and passed it to Winthrop. The old man swirled the contents, murmuring words in a language Thomas didn't recognize. The liquid began to glow with a faint bluish light. The first transfer is always the most difficult, Winthrop said, approaching Thomas. Your body will resist the foreign essence, but once the initial barrier is breached, subsequent renewals become easier. In time, you may even develop a taste for it. I'll die before drinking that, Thomas said. Through clenched teeth. Winthrop smiled thinly. That's precisely what you'll do if you don't drink it, Mr. Briarwood. The binding ritual has already begun. Your life force is being drawn into Winthrop home with each passing moment. Without replacement, you'll be hollow by dawn. As if to illustrate his point, he held the chalice above Thomas's face. In its glowing surface, Thomas saw his own reflection, and recoiled at the sight. His skin had taken on the same waxy pore as the orphanage children, his eyes beginning to show that same emptiness. You feel it, don't you? Winthrop murmured, the house taking hold, drawing you in. It's hungry, Mr. Briarwood. It's always hungry. Thomas could indeed feel something. A cold emptiness spreading through him as though parts of his very self were being pulled away, absorbed into the stone beneath him and the walls around them. The children, he gasped, finding speech increasingly difficult. They never truly die because they're not truly alive anymore. You've trapped them in some kind of suspended state. Preservation, Winthrop corrected. They exist in perfect equilibrium, neither advancing nor declining. No birth, no death, only sustained contribution to the greater whole. And the ones who leave, the older children sent to apprenticeships. A shadow crossed Winthrop's face, a regrettable necessity. The outside world expects children to grow up and depart. We maintain the appearance of a legitimate orphanage. Those who leave carry a portion of Winthrop home with them, enough to sustain our connection, to allow us to reclaim their essence when needed. Reclaim how? Various means. Illness, accident, sudden reversals of fortune that bring them back into our care. The house always collects what it's owed Mr. Briarwood. Winthrop held the chalice to Thomas's lips. drink and join our fellowship. Refuse and be consumed entirely. Those are your only choices now. Thomas turned his head away, but strong hands gripped his jaw, forcing it open. The liquid burned like fire as it poured down his throat, carrying with it flashes of memory that weren't his own. A small boy running through fields of wheat. A woman singing a lullaby. The terror of abandonment. The cold comfort of Winthrop home's embrace. Nathaniel's memories. Thomas realized with horror. He was consuming pieces of the boy's very existence. As the foreign essence spread through him, Thomas felt a surge of unnatural vitality. His pain receded, his senses sharpened, and the fatigue that had been weighing on him vanished completely. For one terrible moment he understood the seductive power of what Winthrop offered, life without end, strength without decline. But with this understanding came something else. A connection to Nathaniel and through him to every child bound to Winthrop home. Thomas could feel them now. Dozens of fragmented souls tethered to the house. Their collective energy flowing through channels built into the very architecture. And he sensed something Winthrop had not told him. The binding worked both ways. Just as the house could draw life from those connected to it, those connected could with sufficient will draw power from the house itself. Thomas closed his eyes, focusing on this newfound awareness. The restraints binding him to the stone table suddenly felt less substantial, as though they existed partially in another realm where his influence might reach. What is he doing? Matron Finch's voice came from far away. He shouldn't be able to. The journalist is stronger than we anticipated. Winthrop replied, alarm evident in his tone. Increase the draw from the children, stabilize the connection. Thomas could feel their attempts to reassert control, cold tendrils trying to burrow deeper into his mind and body, but he had understood something fundamental about the arrangement that perhaps even its creators had forgotten. It was built on belief. The children surrendered their essence because they believed they had no choice, no existence beyond Winthrop home. Opening his eyes, Thomas fixed his gaze on Nathaniel. You can leave, he said, his voice stronger than it should have been given his condition. The walls only hold you because you believe. They do. Silence him, Winthrop commanded. But Thomas could feel the old man's control wavering. Remember what you told me, Nathaniel. How it felt outside. Real. That's because it is real. This place, what they've done to you, that's the illusion. The boy's empty expression flickered, something like awareness returning to his eyes. You belong to yourself, Thomas continued, focusing all his will on breaking through the child's conditioning. Not to Winthrop home. Not to these people. Enough. Winthrop moved to strike Thomas. But his hand passed through air as the restraints disintegrated into dust. Thomas sat up, drawing power from the very channels meant to drain him. The connection went both ways. What the house could take, he could also claim around them. Candles flared with sudden intensity, their flames reaching toward the ceiling. The children, Thomas said, standing unsteadily. I can feel all of them, and now they can feel me. Throughout Winthrop home, a change was occurring. In dormitory beds, children who had existed in half-life for years were stirring, awareness returning to eyes long emptied of expression. On the third floor, caretakers rushed from room to room as cries of confusion and fear replaced the unnatural silence. What have you done? Winthrop demanded, his face contorting with rage and fear. Do you have any idea what will happen if the arrangement fails? Freedom. Thomas answered simply. Life, real life, with all its risks and glories. Not this twisted mockery of existence. He turned to Nathaniel, extending his hand. Come with me. All of you can. Leave now. The boy hesitated, decades of conditioning wearing with the promise of freedom. Then slowly he placed his small hand in Thomas's. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the ritual chamber. Stones began to crack. Mortar crumbling as the very foundation of Winthrop home shuttered. The power that had sustained the arrangement for 33 years was reversing direction, flowing back into the children from whom it had been stolen. Winthrop staggered, his face suddenly showing every one of his 97 years. Deep lines carved themselves into his skin, his hair whitened completely, and his back bent under the weight of accumulated decades. You can't do this, he wheezed, reaching for Thomas with a hand now gnarled and spotted with age. They'll die without the protection of Winthrop home. Disease, accident, the cruelties of the world. All will claim them. Perhaps, Thomas acknowledged. But they'll live first. Really live, not exist as fuel for your unnatural extension. The chamber continued to deteriorate around them, chunks of ceiling crashing to the floor. Thomas lifted Nathaniel into his arms and headed for the stairs, followed by Matron Finch's screams of rage and Winthrop's desperate pleas. The orphanage was in chaos when they emerged. Children were everywhere, some crying, others laughing in wild, unfamiliar freedom. Caretakers ran in all directions, some trying to maintain order, others fleeing as the structure began to fall apart around them. Outside, Thomas shouted, directing the children toward the front doors, which now stood wide open. Everyone outside. He moved through the building, ensuring no child was left behind, using his newfound connection to sense their presence. Some were too weak to walk, having been drained more extensively than others. These Thomas and the older children carried between them. As the last of them crossed the threshold onto the front lawn, a tremendous cracking sound split the night. The central portion of Winthrop home collapsed inward, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. The east and west wings remained standing, though severely damaged. Thomas did a quick count. 47 children. All accounted for. Some of the caretakers had escaped as well, though there was no sign of Matron Finch or Augustus Winthrop. As the dust settled, the children gathered close to Thomas, uncertain and afraid, yet vibrant with new life. Already their complexions were improving, natural color returning to faces long blanched by unnatural forces. What happens now? Asked Emily Sullivan, the 14-year-old Thomas had interviewed earlier. Her voice carried emotion for the first time, apprehension mixed with hope. Now you live, Thomas answered simply. Really live with all the joy and sorrow that entails. The road back to Louisville was crowded that morning. A strange procession of children led by a journalist with wild eyes and a story few would believe. But Thomas Briarwood had evidence, photographs, documents, and most compelling of all, 47 children with identical accounts of their captivity. In the weeks that followed, an investigation uncovered the full extent of Augustus Winthrop's network. Similar orphanages operated in 6 states, each built on sites of supposed mystical significance, each harvesting the life essence of unwanted children to extend the lives of wealthy benefactors. All were shut down, their records seized, their methods exposed. The children were placed in genuine orphanages or in some cases reunited with families who had been told they had died years earlier. As for Winthrop home itself, the ruins were eventually cleared away, the hill fenced off and marked with warnings. But locals claimed that on certain nights, particularly solstices and equinoxes, lights could be seen moving among the rubble, and the sound of children's voices carried on the wind. Thomas Briarwood never fully recovered from his brief connection to the arrangement. Something had changed within him. Some fundamental understanding of the boundary between life and death. His hair remained prematurely white, a physical reminder of his ordeal. He continued his career as a journalist, though with a new focus, investigating institutions that claimed to serve children while potentially exploiting them. His experience had taught him that the most terrible monsters were not supernatural creatures, but ordinary humans willing to sacrifice others for their own benefit. And sometimes late at night, he would wake to find Nathaniel standing at the foot of his bed. Not the real boy, who had been adopted by a Louisville family and was thriving, but a spectral remnant of their connection. A reminder of what had nearly been lost. "Are we safe now?" the apparition would ask. Yes, Thomas would answer, though he was never entirely certain. The house is gone. The arrangement is broken. But in his heart, he knew that as long as there were those willing to extend their lives at the expense of others, as long as there were forgotten children, no one would miss. The temptation to create new arrangements would remain. And so he kept watch and he kept writing and he made sure the world remembered what had happened at Winthrop home, the orphanage where no one was ever born or died until the night when everything changed. The Kentucky Historical Society maintains no records of Winthrop home for children. No newspaper accounts corroborate Thomas Briarwood's story. The hill outside Louisville, known locally as Crow Hill, shows no evidence of any structure ever having stood there. But in the Louisville Public Library archives, a curious document exists. A single photograph yellowed with age showing a man with prematurely white hair standing beside a boy of about 8. On the back, written in faded ink, Nathaniel 1903 living. And if you visit Crow Hill on the winter solstice, locals say you can sometimes hear children's voices carried on the wind. Not crying or screaming, but laughing. Really laughing with the pure joy of those who know what it means to be truly